Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine avatara varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. In our previous talks, we saw that Swami Shardanand before describing the divine birth of Sri Ramakrishna, gives a background, the circumstances before his birth, the circumstances both in the West and the East. So, in the previous paragraphs, we saw, paragraph 1 to 7, that a comparative study has been made as to which ideals, the Western ideal, the so-called Western ideal, it's not restricted to the West. Many people now, the world has become a global village, so there's no such thing as Western or Eastern anymore. In those days, ideas traveled very slowly. So we described the Western civilization as one who focused more on the external world, and the Eastern civilization or the Indian civilization as one who focused on the internal world. Both worlds are important if we have to lead a life, a harmonious life in the world. Both the external excellence, the external possibilities have to be understood and explored and followed. That is what Swami Vivekananda used to believe. And so also, but not at the cost of the internal world, because the internal world gives us stability, fulfillment to our life. Without the without the right balance, a normal human being cannot even negotiate the problems of the world. To negotiate the problems or the different issues that encounters a person while living in the world, he has to have a balanced life. Focus as give as much attention to the inner life, or to the life which deals with the subtle things such as your mind and the questions of identity, the questions of spiritual identity, or the other things which really matter in the world, is how to survive in the world with the skill sets that you require to earn a living in the world. So both are absolutely necessary, but predominantly both civilizations, if you see, they have been focusing on one or the other. In the West, there is excessive focus on external development, whereas in India, there was an excessive focus or excessive emphasis on the internal development of man. Having examined, Swami Shardanji says, the temporary nature of the external world, Indians believed that for lasting happiness, for a lasting harmonious life, a peaceful life in the world, one should give equal, if not more, importance to the internal life. So that is why the four ideals, among all the four ideals, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, which are known as the four purusharthas, the Vedic rishis were wise people because they knew that all people cannot or will not strive for higher fulfillment. They are traveling from lower truth to higher truth. So that is why the famous Vedic dictum, ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. There is one truth, but people speak of it in different ways. A materialist will say, the world is real for me, I don't care. But when he examines it deeply, and when he finds that the gross things do not give him lasting fulfillment, he feels painful when he approaches certain phenomena that we see, the phenomena of losing a near and dear one, phenomena of losing the wealth, or the idea of losing the wealth. One need not lose wealth, the fear of losing wealth. So there are so many fears associated with the external world. When he examines them, He goes a bit deeper. It goes into the field of intellectual development, intellectual happiness, a higher kind of happiness. The happiness he finds in music, fine arts, and other things. More, you may say, subtle kinds of enjoyments or subtle kind of joy he seeks, because the gross joys, the joys which perhaps an animal has when it relishes a meal, you must see that among animals, all they believe in is to get a hearty meal. They hunt, the whole life is spent in having a good and a wholesome meal to survive, because that is the survival instinct. But human being is definitely superior than this animal. So he thinks, should I be spending my life like those animals, eating, drinking, and procreating, and all those things? So when he understands the limitations of the external things to give him eternal joy, he sees that there is joy and a mixture of joy and sorrow, but he lasts for something higher. So he takes up higher pursuits. He takes up the spiritual pursuit ultimately, and then goes within. That is what the Indian culture has taught us. But according to Swamiji, he says that there are many things which a human being needs apart from his physical and mental needs. There is a deeper existential need. There is a need where his restlessness becomes less. Peace is peace comes to a person when there is less restlessness. When restlessness increases, you lose peace. It's a very simple equation. So what causes restlessness? What causes fear? What causes greed? What causes envy? All these qualities we have to understand, we have to examine what is the reason. Does greed lead to more restlessness, or possessing many things, they lead to more restlessness? So a internal examination of the human personality was done. So that's why Shardanji says in paragraph number 8 that India's national life was based on religion. Its civilization was constituted in a unique way. Somehow they found that there is no end to the greed of man. There are certain needs which mankind has learned to fulfill. His needs are fulfilled, but his greeds will never be fulfilled. It will go on endlessly, and one day he will die. That is why when he dies, the deeper questions come, but by that time it is too late to even inquire into the nature of afterlife, death, what happens to all the things that have accumulated. So that pravrutti marga is that which enables you to satisfy your greed, not your need. Once the needs are fulfilled, a wise man thinks that my needs are fulfilled, now let me try to get something higher. So he believes, or he understands by the experience of other people, by the experience of people who have been consumed by greed. History shows so many examples that what ultimately happens to a person who is not satisfied with his needs when the needs are fulfilled, but he tries to satisfy his greed. And to satisfy greed is compared in the Vairagya Shatakam by King Yayati, who sacrificed his his son's youth, and he again got all the youth because the son said, I don't care. He just agreed to hand over his youth. I don't know whether it is possible, but that's how the story goes. So he said, Father, if you want to enjoy the world, because he was getting old, he said, you take away. I am happy to just sit quietly and meditate. He was a deeply spiritual person. So he handed over his youth to his father, King Yayati, who was thinking that I have become old and all the wealth and all the pleasures of the world I have not yet enjoyed. All my energy was spent. Since he was a king, he conquered so many kingdoms and gathered lot of wealth. Then he thought, when am I going to enjoy it? I'm becoming old now. So somebody told him, if your son agrees and exchanges his youth with you, you can get your youth back and you can perhaps live a longer life. And he thinks if that is possible, and the son was ready to sacrifice. So he felt very happy. He thought, okay, now let me spend my youth again and enjoy what I have gathered around me. But unfortunately, he found that the greed went on increasing. Then he wrote the beautiful book, because experience taught him that if there is a fire and ghee is like pouring, the ghee are like desires. The oil or ghee, the fuel which you add into the fire, will make the fire burn more. So the greed increases. There is no way that you can satiate your greed. It is not going to happen. It is just like ghee. When it is poured into the fire, it burns brighter. The desire to have more and more and more increases. So I found, what's the use? I got my youth back, and again that greed has overtaken me, and I am still accumulating. That habit is not going. So that's why he comes to the conclusion, and he writes the Vairagya Shatakam, saying that through Vairagya alone, a person can seek true fulfillment. So that is the other ideal which India developed after a lot of experience of the world, after getting a lot of blows in the world, after running after external objects. But unfortunately, man does not learn. Yesterday we discussed how other people sacrifice their lives in the world. That is why Buddha said, Swami Vivekananda said, that don't laugh at people who are suffering in the world. By their example, they are just showing what happens if you make mistakes. They are the ones who give a lesson to the discerning mind, to a mind which has discrimination and the wisdom. Says, if I follow this path as this person has done, I will face the same consequences. That is, I repeat again, that is the wisdom which Buddha got. He never faced sorrow in his life, but three people, a sick man, a old man, and a person who was dead, when he saw, it was a big shock for him. And these three people taught him that you are going to suffer the same fate unless you do something about it. And that is why he goes out leaving his earth and home. He is leaving his palace, and he goes and seeks enlightenment, which he gets when he becomes the Buddha. So he gets nirvana. So then he finds true joy, and then he says, now having discovered this path, I wish to share it with the entire world. So a large number of people in India followed this path of self-control, because yoga says your restlessness can go only when the mental vrittis become less. How are the vrittis going to become less? How is your mind going to get peace? By not for running this rat race, not following the rat race of greed, possession. It ultimately leads to the destruction of the person who is uh, pursuing these. The greed can cause. Now you see what are the consequences of the first two world war, and even today we are at the brink of a world war. Why is that happening? Because some countries or some people feel that they deserve a better share of the world's resources. Every country feels that. And that is how nationalism comes into force. They feel that we should get a lion's share. So if there is a healthy competition, it is fine. But when the greed increases beyond a certain limit, then it results in war. It results in force. And then there is peace is shattered. So the external rat race always ends in misery. That is what Indians found. And then they thought that unless each and every individual regulates his life with self-control, artha and kama. Artha means wealth, kama means desire. If that they are not regulated with help of dharma, then the result is like what happened in the Mahabharata. When greed overtook dharma, when artha and kama became more prominent for Duryodhana, then a war took place and there was so much of killing and death and misery. So the purpose of enjoyment, artha and kama, is if it is acquired legitimately through dharma, is moksha. So Ishavasya Upanishad tells us that all these things that you do in the world, cover it with the Lord. And if we want to enjoy, but see that it does not exceed a certain limit. So do everything with self-control. So the Indians, when they found a huge universe inside, a huge, you can say, a treasure of peace and a wonderful peace, joy, and fulfillment within, they found that the lessons of life that we are learning, the only purpose it serves, whether others teach you lessons, whether you learn it from others, examples, or learn it by burning. There are two ways to learn lessons in life. One is by putting your finger. Suppose you want to know the property of fire. One way to learn is just go and put your finger into the fire, and when it burns, you don't touch the fire again. You know what it does to you. That is one way of learning from suffering. But there is another way. Wiser people do that. They see other people burning and they take precaution and not allow that to happen to them. They avoid doing that. But that is only if one is introspective. So Indians were always reminded all the ideals in the East were designed in such a way that somewhere or the other, through all our actions, our daily actions, everything was done with the idea of imprinting upon the mind the temporary nature of the external world. As I told you even the other day, it's for many people it looks very peculiar why all the big pujas, Durga Puja, Ganesh Puja, and all the pujas is followed by the Visarjan of the image. The image which you have purchased, shelling out a lot of money, decorating it. After the puja is over, you just destroy it. So through the ritual, through the ritualistic worship, also some lessons our ancestors, our Vedic rishis wanted to teach, that no matter how much, with how much fanfare you decorate a image, eat all the food and prasad and all those things, they make elaborate, one day you have to do the Visarjan. So that is a grim reminder to all of the people that in this world, no matter what you acquire, what you get, one day you have to just let it go. As you let go the image, you do Visarjan into the water. That is just a reminder. And the essence is that Ganesha or the Shiva or the Durga image that you were worshipping externally, has to be worshipped internally. She has to place a find in the heart. So that is why self-control, our yogis found that peace is to be found within, by going within, by meditating within. So that is why Swami Shardanandji says that the conflict in Western society is because of disparity of material enjoyment. Now, whenever there is a class system based on wealth, then naturally people who have more wealth will clash with people who have less. They will envy. There will be conflict because they feel that these people are getting unnecessary privileges. Whether they earn money by hard work or not, the people who have less privileges always have some kind of conflict with those who, the haves and have-nots. The whole history of humanity is a fight between haves and have-nots. So if you want peace in such a world, it is not going to happen. So having reviewed the characteristics of ancient India's national life, which was based on self-control, just trying to satisfy one's needs, not one's greed, and then focusing more on the interior development, the development of controlling the mind, controlling the senses, so that you become less restless and get peace. So comparing these two ideals, the idea that the Western conquest of India, Swami Shardanji tries to describe what happened after the West conquered India and tried to force some of the Western ideals on Indians. So they came, the first thing they did was to say that Atman and all this internal spiritual world is just a poetic fancy. You just give it up, eat, drink, and be merry like what we do. Be rational. And a lot of young people in those days, Swami Shardananji says, they became increasingly convinced that the Western ideas are valid. The so-called glory, or the the wonderful things, the development, the external progress that they saw in the West, they captivated their minds, the young minds, and they tried to give up their national life based on renunciation and self-control, which gave them deep inner peace, developed the sciences like yoga and all the wonderful sciences of the mind, which made India a very happy country to live in. So the ancient system of education was discarded, partly because of the political occupation of a Western power, and Indians lost both. They lost their own unique spiritual culture. At the same time, they could not compete because they were not allowed to compete with the Western nations. Western nations were reluctant to give the fruits of science and technology. Now things are slowly changing because we are learning it the hard way and trying to dominate, uh, trying to establish oneself in the external world also. But the main worry Swami Vivekananda had, that we will lose both the external as well as the greatness which we had in the internal. So that would completely ruin our national life. That was the danger which Swami Shardanji says. The paths of yoga, spirituality, and paths of bhoga, enjoyment, both were lost to the Indians. That is why there was so much of poverty. It took so many years, 75 years after independence, and even we are struggling now to bring some kind of material prosperity and also revive the spirituality which we had lost. We had lost both. So by mere imitation of the West and buffeted by the worldly desires which went on increasing, trying to imitate the West, India did not reach the pinnacle of glory as the Westerners did in the external world. And at the same time, they did not care. At least the ancient India was very powerful in the study of the internal world, and they didn't bother. So losing both, India's condition became like a boat without anyone to steer it. Neither the Western ideas nor Eastern ideas were Indians were able to follow, neither the Western nor the Eastern ideas. So India, Swami Shardananji argues that many people thought that India did not have a national life. It is only when the political organization of England, who ruled over it for nearly 200 years, they created an idea of empire. That was not true. There were great empires. Of course, they changed hands as the ruler changed. So also the history of monarchy in all the countries is like that. There were foreign conquests. Sometimes you won, sometimes you lost. Again, regained your national identity. So India's national identity, it had a national life which was rooted in spirituality, not in politics. But because of neglecting the spiritual values and holding on to rituals like idolatry, following many superstitions, a lot of external ritualistic worship, which even today, religion or spirituality is confused with all the pujas that we do, very elaborate pujas which have been nothing uh, other than some social gatherings. They have just become some kind of occasion to gather people, to have a social gathering, just as you have parties for different occasions in the West. Religious gatherings have been reduced to a social gathering where a lot of fanfare and a lot of eating, drinking, and making merry is going on. So that is down, it is as good as materialism. So, in the name of religion, people thought that they were religious, and this idolatry, or maybe worshipping different gods for different small desires, forgetting the root or core values of spirituality, they started running after these external. It happens in every religion. People forget the core and then they get stuck into priestcraft and other externals of religion. And that is the reason why most of the major religions, they they decay because the core of religion is to develop, is the development of the internal personality, not the external. For external developing the external world, science and technology are enough, but to use science and technology properly and not use it for weapons of mass destruction, you need internal technology or internal development. So the foreign missionaries who came told all the Hindus or the Indians, the Eastern adherents of Eastern religions who were already divided into different sects, that your religion is not going to make you a great nation. You better give it, follow our ideals. But at the same time, they were not willing to give the full fruits of science and technology to them. So naturally, we gave up whatever little spirituality we had, and at the same time, we tried to catch hold of the Western uh, achievements in science and technology, tried to learn it, but because of the colonial rule, it was difficult to pursue that also. So organizations were formed with according to the Western ideals, and the without understanding how the political system, the social system works in the West, they just borrowed all their ideas. There's nothing wrong. If the idea is good, we have to borrow some good ideas from the West. So the people could not assimilate those ideas. They just uh, fought for women's rights, women's emancipation, widow remarriage, because there were some evils, caste, fighting against caste, and then uh, uh, breaking the orthodox rules and trying to remarry the widows, which were not allowed in orthodox Hinduism. So there were many things that they were angry, and many of the superstitions went away, no doubt. But at the same time, along with that, they even started neglecting the core principles of religion. But that spirituality gave us our national identity. And Shardanji says Sri Ramakrishna came to restore spirituality. Not restore, though he began with rituals, he began as a priest. He was not bound by priestcraft. He was not a priest in the sense that other people understand. He did not do puja or do rituals to get bound into more and more, and did not get worldly. He knew that without giving up the world, without giving up the greed, the envy, and all the anger and all those things which make a demon out of a man, without that, religion cannot thrive. True spirituality can never be practiced. So, though there were some developments happening, some Western methods, uh, they came like railways and media, the newspapers, books. Through that, there were some things which the young Indians found very useful. And slowly, people like Narendra and others who later on made use of that Western knowledge to understand the core principles of religion. But for that, they had to go to Sri Ramakrishna, who was practically illiterate. So It was like Swami Vivekananda and all the people, younger people, thought uh, associated spirituality or religion with learning, with modern learning, with university learning. The more you study, the more you become academically bright, the more spiritual you are. That wrong idea was totally removed by Sri Ramakrishna, who showed that spiritual experience does not depend on how much you have studied about religion or how good is your academic knowledge. So that typical Western tendency, which was animating the younger people of those days to reject everything that was Hindu or whatever belonged to the eternal religion, including the good principles. They wanted to reject that because they thought if people are practicing superstitions, it's not the fault of the Vedic rishis. It is the degradation of religion because it is wrongly understood is the cause for all sorrow. Just as Christ is not responsible or Buddha is not responsible for the dilution in their ideals which happen as days pass. When the message gets diluted, you can't blame Jesus. Jesus' original message, the original message of Vedic rishis, of the Upanishads, of Gita, they are based on eternal principles. So you can't blame the founders, the people who realized, who experienced true religion for the degradation in religion, just as you can't blame Newton and all the Einstein and other scientists for uh, for the fact that these scientific discoveries have led to the atom bomb. That's why Einstein once joked, if I knew that this discovery of this E is equal to mc square, the conversion of mass into energy, if that is going to uh, lead to a nuclear bomb, then I would have rather become a plumber than a scientist. I would have become a humble plumber if my science has caused so much havoc. So you can't blame Einstein, you can't blame Newton. So also you can't blame the rishis and the founders of different religions for the for the dilution of their message and giving a bad name to religion. So this is another uh, point which Swami Shardanji mentions, that though India was not free from defects in the field of religion, and though the people of India for the time being understood the value of the Western development of science and technology, but this modern knowledge enabled them to remove the defects in their own religion. So casteism, all the other ideas, superstitions, and so many things which were a result of wrong understanding of the true Vedic or Upanishadic religion, which degraded the Indian society, that could be confronted with the scientific and love for truth, the love for truth that science gave. I'm not saying the bad effects of science and technology because they were misused by many people as much as it was used. Science has been used for the good of humanity, but also it has been used for the destruction of humanity. The reason is that along with the scientific and technological development, the development of the internal personality of the heart did not take place. So if you give the science and technology in the hands of evil people, they are going to misuse it. So both are necessary. A good internal personality, harmonious development of the heart and the head and the hands, as Swami Vivekananda said. So that is what ancient national life of India had set up as an ideal. Have artha and kama, have worldly enjoyment. Everybody cannot become spiritual, but at the same time regulate it. Have some kind of control over your greed, your over all the bad qualities which can lead to the misuse of the wealth and the desires, the artha and kama, if there is excess of artha, excess of desire, if it is not regulated by dharma, then it can lead to danger in society. So that is why uh, Swami Shardanji says that in general, that the degradation of religion in the West because of the conflict, religion degraded because it failed to give up its superstitious idea, and science said we are not going to accept, we are after truth. They were after material truth, but that they tried to apply that scientific principles to religion, and the organized religion resisted it. They did not allow reasoning, and then they said no, you have to believe in certain dogmas. So that is how the religious structures of the West were destroyed by the Westerners themselves. Galileo, Copernicus, and all those people said, don't teach all these superstitions. Jesus perhaps never taught all these things. You are teaching certain things which have nothing to do with the original teachings of the Prophet. So that is what everybody all over the world, wherever religious movements and religious organizations have failed, it is because they did not hold on to the core values of Vairagya, or the unworldliness or the spirituality, which was the core of their religion. If spirituality is given up, the whole structure crumbles. Any religion or any movement, even science will crumble if it gives its search for truth. Truth that tells you that there should be a harmony between the external world and the internal world. That is what Vedas gave, a comprehensive philosophy. They didn't say everything external is bad, but holding on to the gross, holding on to the external world, giving up the internal world, which result in moral virtues and values and core spiritual values, can become very fatal. You will use that advancement in science and technology to kill yourselves. So modern science has improved the condition of human life by providing people with various objects of enjoyment and also health, improving health, and but it has failed to bring peace. That is not the jurisdiction of science and technology. Modern science cannot do that because they don't deal with the internal world, they deal with the external world. They can bring some kind of comforts or some kind of ease in the to negotiate the troubles that we confront in the external world, but they can't remove restlessness in the mind. That is the uh, jurisdiction of spirituality. Only following spirituality or following religion can give you internal peace. External peace depends on internal peace. Wrong use of the external development can lead to disturbing of your internal peace also, because of quarrels, because of competition, because of wars and all those things. So the constant restlessness, which is the result of wrong use of science and technology, or maybe excessive use of science and technology, it gives a kind of restlessness. Anything you do in the gross world, if it goes to excess, some kind of excess, it gives restlessness, because the more you develop, the more desires are there, and when you can't live up to those desires, there grows a constant restlessness. That greed makes you go after run after things. And there is that famous story of Tolstoy, where in greed, a person was told by somebody, a king, that see, today morning at dawn you start running, and till dusk, whatever area or whatever distance you cover, that whole land is yours. So you just keep running. If you run 5 miles, that whole area is yours. So this gentleman was so greedy that he went on and running. He would not take rest, because he thought, if I take rest, I will lose at least a few yards and the whole area I'll be missing. So I'll be forfeiting. So I should be running and try to cover as many miles as possible. So he went and went without rest, without water, without food. At the end of the day, when it was sunset, he was so exhausted and he tired himself so much that just before sunset, in his effort to cover a few more meters, a few more yards, he just fell down dead. And then the king said, "See how foolish he is. He wanted this whole piece of land. Now, all the piece of land is 3 cubits of earth. That is where he will be buried now. So he dies with only 3 cubits of earth." So that is an object lesson through the story. Leo Tolstoy seems to convey that greed can be so fatal. And if we don't mind our ways and stop this mad race to acquire more and more, someday or the other will come to grief. So that is why, to halt the degradation caused by the misuse of science and technology, and also to halt the degradation of religion in the East, misusing religion for material development. That is another mistake which Eastern people made. They converted the grand religion of the Upanishads to rituals, to pujas, to pujas, meaningless pujas. Pujas are good if the proper idea is understood. But unfortunately, we get embroiled in materialism in the name of puja. The core values of puja are forgotten, and we end up being more gross, more addicted to enjoyment, because every puja, it becomes grander and grander. The more the grand food and all those things in the name of puja, what we cannot eat uh, during the normal days, we try to satisfy it in the name of all these big festivals. And our greed increases. As our wealth increases, the puja also becomes grander and grander. And then the core of values which our ancestors or the rishis of the Vedas had planned when they developed these rituals to go to have some kind of self-control, that was forgotten, and people got addicted to a kind of wrong religion or a ritualistic religion promoted by the priest for their selfish purposes. So in both cases, both East and the West lost their way, because one has to complement each other. So who will be there? Who will halt the degradation of religion in the East and also in the West, and also stop the ill effect, the bad effects of materialism of the West, and teach people a new path of peace? So that is how Swami Shardananji is preparing the ground, and he says God reincarnates to avert the decline of religion. So Lord Krishna has promised in the Gita, whenever there is a decline in religion, he has to come to restore religion, the right spirit of religion, and help people to regain peace. There may be wars. When he came, he found that religion had degraded to such an extent that war was inevitable, because the greed was consuming everybody. The greed for power, the greed for wealth, the greed for property. So perhaps a war was inevitable. But he gave his message even in the midst of this sorrow, when people were watching the bad effects of greed, of going after wealth and all those things. The Mahabharata teaches that this is the world. Learn your lessons. The earlier you learn, the better. And Sri Krishna gives his wonderful message of the Bhagavad Gita, and there are so many other wonderful pieces of advice, where on one side is shown the greed and all the things which a worldly life leads to, and on the other side, how to balance it with spirituality. Both are shown in the Mahabharata. Mahabharata is a depiction of life as it is. It does not speak of an ideal life or an ideal civilization. No matter in which civilization you are born, which age you are born, there will be an equal number of good and bad people. the methods will change. The methods of war will change. The methods of quarrel will change. The methods of competition will change. But greed and all those things will continue as long as man runs after the material world. So he has to turn inward and become spiritual if he has to save himself and save the world. So that is why the Lord has to come and show us the way how to negotiate the problems and the sorrows that we have created. Will not the need of the age intensely arouse the compassion of the Lord? If Krishna says, out of compassion, he incarnates to save when there is a limit, when adharma comes to its ultimate limit, then the Lord only can come and save. Otherwise, mankind will end up destroying each other. They will destroy the whole world. So, that anxiety of man, of human beings, that emptiness motivates the Lord to incarnate and mitigate the sufferings and the sorrow that he faces in the world. So, the Lord, Swami Shardanji says, "O reader," I mean, he is addressing the reader and said, "The Lord has truly appeared as a world teacher. Listen with faith to his messages." That is, he is referring to Sri Ramakrishna. That such a person has indeed come, as Krishna had promised, every time adharma takes the upper hand, to bring back dharma back into the world. So, what is his message? How did he reappear as a world teacher? By saying, as many paths, so many faiths. As many faiths, so many paths. Because the problem was each one was fighting because of different faiths. So they thought they were exclusive, mutually exclusive. They were fighting that my path is right, but to stop the quarrel, somebody had to come and say that I have traveled through all the paths, all lead to the same goal. So why do you quarrel with each other? You follow your path, God bless you. Allow the other person to follow his path. So you will realize God if you practice any spiritual discipline wholeheartedly. Whichever be the path, all the ancient paths which have renunciation and abhyasa and vairagya as their core principles, whether it is Jesus or any other prophet, Gita, Upanishads, everybody says that true lasting peace, lasting stability, lasting security cannot be found in the world. It can be found only in the Atman, the pure consciousness which is within. So this divine journey within, the famous teaching of the Bible that the kingdom of God is within you. He didn't say the kingdom of God is outside in the galaxies, in the planets and everywhere else. Even in the Vishwarup Darshan, Sri Krishna explains to Arjuna, see, this is my external form. It leads, as you see good things, you will see the evil things. You will see the destruction. He showed both the forms of the external glory of the divine Lord. So he said, see, this is how the world is. But if you want peace, if you want eternal life, then you have to go within. That is also the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. That is also the teaching of the Kathopanishad, which says, Paranchikani Vitrunat Swayambhu Tasmat Parang Pashyati. The Lord within makes a mistake by going outward and getting trapped in the non-eternal, in the temporary things of the world. So, but some wise person, seeing the experiences of those who suffer in the world, tries to go within and tries to meditate within. So, Swami Shardanji in this paragraph is appealing to us that reflect intensely upon what we describe now in the future chapters. Look at the superhuman renunciation and austerities that Sri Ramakrishna performed so that he could revive that ancient knowledge which was practically about to be lost. And then Swami Shardanji says, let us undertake this journey. Come, let us purify ourselves by studying and meditating on his pure and divine life. That is why when uh, anybody approaches us for mantra diksha or some kind of spiritual initiation, that is initiation into the spiritual path. That is what diksha is all about. It is not that something you give and the matter ends there. No, it is the beginning of a journey. So I normally I insist that everybody who wants to know what mantra diksha can or what spiritual initiation can do to a person, then he has to read the wonderful life and message of Sri Ramakrishna, Srima Sharda Devi and Swamiji in detail. Try to understand. Swami Shardanji has taken so much pains to to paint the divine play, or the great master, as uh, Swami Shardanji calls him. How the great master taught his disciples, how he taught different categories of disciples, householder disciples, monastic disciples, and another category of disciples, which Gargi, Swami Ashokananji's disciple, that famous sister Gargi, Mary Louis Burke, she said there is another category, and she got it from Swamiji's ideas, that there is a third order. So she says there is one order which says we are householders. There's another order of life where you can say they are monastics who take formal monastic vows. But there is a third order. There are some people in between who lead a life of renunciation, live a dedicated life, who do not become householders in that sense. They live in the world, but they are not of the world. So Gargi preferred to call it, because Gargi, Mary Louise was married, but she uh, separated from her husband and then uh, followed Swami Ashokananji. She used to sometimes live in the monastery, sometimes live in her house. She was also earning something. She lived a wonderful life, and finally, when she was getting old, she uh, used to wear the Gerua robes. Ultimately, she took to the monastic way of life, but she always said that I belong to the third order, neither householder nor monastic. So she could mix with the householders in a way in which monks could not perhaps do, and also because of her dedicated life, because of it was which was not motivated by any selfish or maybe worldly motive. She could also mix and stay in the monasteries and mix with the monks. So that is, whatever be the category that one belongs to, Sri Krishna had a message for all. He had a message for Master Mashay, Nag Mashay, he had a message for Girish Chandra Ghosh, he had a message for Narain, he had a message for so many other people who came to him seeking spiritual solace. He had not come for one category of people. He came for all the three types of life which you can find in the world. So, his proper understanding of Sri Krishna's life will give us an idea of what kind of spiritual life or what kind of ideal one has to keep in front of one's own, keep as one's own goal in front of ourselves, whether one leads the life of a householder or the monastic life or the life of in the third order, as uh, Sister Gargi put it in one of his books. She has described that there was a need. There are, of course, other organizations also where they are known as Karyakartas. There is Vivekananda Kendra, where one dedicates one life. One does not get entangled in worldly life, so that they can spend more time. They choose not to have a family because that comes in the way of fulfilling whatever they believe as their ideal. So the less the bondage, as Holy Mother said, if you are not bound by the demands of the world, then you are more free, or you are almost half free. So some widow in those days, there was some effort to remarry the widows, but some of the girls who lost their husbands came, and the mother came, said, why can't you just tell her to remarry? Said, why do you want to drag her into suffering? She's happy. Send her to Nivedita school. She can be very useful there. Why do you want everybody? She's already half free. If she is not entangled, she can do so much of good work. So don't force anybody. So that is how Holy Mother advised them. So Sri Ramakrishna is a message. If you read the gospel, especially if you read the Great Master, all the different people who came, whether they became monastics later or whether they were householders when they came to Sri Ramakrishna, or they preferred to be in the third order, all of them got some inspiration. And it is for everybody. His wonderful life shows what true dharma is, what true religion is. Religion is defined as by the word dharma in Hinduism. So dharma teaches us how to live a life of balance in this world. That is the true purpose of religion. That is why incarnations come, to show the world what is the goal of life and how to fulfill it, no matter where you are. And Sri Ramakrishna had that wonderful uh, method where he could raise a person from where he was, no matter how worldly a person was, no matter how pure a person was. For everybody, he had a different message he used to give, separate advice to separate people. And to understand the wonderful message as we see in the gospel, which we discuss on Sunday, it is essential to understand the great master. That will give us an idea of what his teachings are and how it is to be understood. So that is why this great master is so important. So I'll see if there are some questions, and we will conclude for today. How do we, one question is there, how do we remove restlessness due to external problems? External problems, just a minute, from our mind. Yeah. So mind is something which can become external or become internal. Mind, the problems are felt only in the mind. Problems may be in the body, but physical problems also cause a reaction in the mind. It causes restlessness in the mind. And internal problems, existential problems, the problems which are caused by the bubbling up of thoughts and samskaras, that is also causing a problem. So problem can be external or internal. There is only one solution, and that is the spiritual solution. So there cannot be any worldly solution to our spiritual problems, because the problem is is internal. So the problem may look to be external, but the more we recede, the more that is why the Kathopanishad says that those who are very strong, dhira, those who are wise, steady, they understand the importance of internalizing their journey, not to be too much engaged, not be concerned with things that really do not concern you. If you lessen that, one cannot do it all of a sudden. One has to progressively uh, give up unnecessary attachments to the things which really don't concern us. That way we can save, that way our minds will become calmer, and the less restless we will be. Our restlessness is because we find too many things which we find too difficult to handle. Things become odd because we go beyond our capacity. We are so external in our approach to life. We always seem to be running after things which really should not concern us. We go out after it because of greed, not because we need to go. We go because we are greedy, or maybe because of certain desires which make us run after that. Just reducing that, we can solve the problems in the mind because of external restlessness due to external problems. Problems can be external or internal, the solution is the same. External problems are easily recognized. That is why one can be careful. But there are certain internal problems which have to be resolved by higher spiritual practices. That is why we take mantra diksha, do spiritual practices to remove our internal problems. External problems you can remove by discrimination, by just minding your own business. If you just see, there are so many things, problems you can avoid just by minding one's own business, focusing on your internal problems, just going sitting quiet for some time. That is why Thakur used to say Nirjan Vas. Go into solitude now and then. Don't always be in a rush to engage yourself. Don't go here, don't go there. Because you see, people, there is a tendency when they feel there's nothing else to do, oh, they will say, okay, now let us go on a trip, let us go on a cruise, let us go on, go for a party, let us go to visit this. Whether it is important or not, whether you need it or not, you just happen to do it. And the result is, when you come back, there is a sort of hangover. We don't realize that instead of solving the problem, they are compounding our problems. The restlessness seems to increase. So one has to use one's own discrimination first to add, not to add more restlessness, and then remove the internal restlessness which is already there. Already we have sufficient unto the day the evil thereof. Jesus said, sufficient unto the day the evil thereof. There is already, there are so much of problems that we are facing. Why add more? Why add more karma? That is the easiest way. First, stop adding more karma, and then second, solve the problems which are already there. Since today we are basically bombed by external things from news, people would retreating a little bit more and avoiding unnecessary stimuluses help definitely together with that is what is meant by abhyasa and vairagya. You are exactly correct. First is withdrawal, that is vairagya. Withdrawal from things that do not concern you. That is the first step. But that is not enough. We have to complement it with abhyasa. We have to, because vairagya may help you with external things, external problems, external objects. But what about internal problems? For that you need abhyasa, practice, spiritual practice, repeating of the holy name, prayers. These are different methods discovered by different paths, discovered by different prophets and different saints and different rishis, the seers, the sages. They discovered different paths. Each of these paths, 4 different paths, which deal with the 4 different aspects of thinking, feeling, willing, and also the restraining power of the mind. All these things, if they are practiced, they will help. But at the same time, one has to practice vairagya also. So I'll take your leave. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. So there's one more question I'll just answer. How to keep our mind calm and peaceful amidst worldly people? Sometimes we have to be with other people who aren't interested in spiritual things. The mind gets upset. Oh, that is the only way is, that's why Sri Ramakrishna gave the advice. If you see the gospel, attend the gospel class, almost every other conversation, Sri Ramakrishna is pleading with them. Now and then just leave the place, just go into Nirjan Vas or go into solitude. But that desire to do that, if you always want company, then there will be problems. Now and then you have to withdraw. You cannot avoid, I know, but there are many things which you can avoid in life. We say we can't avoid. We say, oh, it is my duty, I should go there, I should go here. That is not the right attitude. If you can change that attitude, that I don't need to uh, uh, satisfy everybody. That is why Yatiswaran used to say, if you think you can please everybody, that is a wrong thing. You can obviously never please everybody. That is not possible, because unless you please yourself, unless you are happy, How can you make others happy? You will just be confusing them and causing more problems. So that is how first step is to avoid first step is to avoid unnecessary engagement with people who really cause some kind of restlessness in your mind. Once that is done, it can be done by going into solitude now and then, or going into holy company and try to find out how to reduce that restlessness. That is vairagya. And then abhyasa, by practicing. Just going to solitude and thinking about different things will not help. Solitude can be useful only if that solitude is used to develop, to practice some kind of spirit, to do some kind of spiritual practice which can stabilize the mind, which can calm down the mind. That is very important. So I'll take your leave. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.